All right. Well, this week we're going to be focusing on the civil rights movement, at least taking a look at the broader purpose of why people were looking to fight for change to create a more perfect union, so to speak. And we are going to start off by reading this article and answering some questions on it. Hopefully, I've already asked you a very important question, like what are some changes that you would like to see in society? Let's have Smokely make an appearance. Sure, why not? Climb all over me while I'm making a video for class. Anyways, let's get to the article. And what we see with this article is just a little bit of how Dr. King got his strategy across. And this article is about 5 strategies that you can use in your life to try to make change in the world. That's literally the title of the article, How to Change the World, 5 Persuasive Strategies from Martin Luther King. So let's get to it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not the first person to demand racial equality and justice in America, but he may be the most well-known. Brave and influential leaders like Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells came before King, but none are more remembered or talked about than him. Neither was King the first captivating speaker the world had ever seen. People have studied and practiced moving, powerful speech for hundreds of years. He followed in the footsteps of great speakers and changemakers like Aristotle, Gandhi, and Benjamin Mays. If King was not the first person to fight for equality and justice in the United States, and he was not the first person to be a great public speaker, then why is he one of the most commonly taught figures in American history? In 1965, Rabbi Max Nussbaum described King as, quote, the man who has changed the moral climate of America to a point by which our country and our nation will never be the same again. He was not wrong. The country did change. The world changed. So how did he do it? He did it with powerful persuasive techniques that moved people to action. If you pay attention, you'll see other activists and change makers around you using these as well. Perhaps you will even use them yourself. Persuasive strategy number 1, combine a radical message with traditional language. Here's a quote from Dr. King. We are not wrong. We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. And if we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. If we are wrong, Jesus of Nazareth was merely a utopian dreamer that never came down to earth. If we are wrong, justice is a lie. Love has no meaning. And that was from Dr. King's address at the Holt Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. Today, King is rarely remembered as a radical, but at the time, his ideas were considered as such. Many people in the 1950s and 60s found King to be dangerous and provocative. The FBI even monitored his activities and took actions against him. Usually, radicals struggle to gain support from the mainstream. Their ideas are seen as too extreme. Their messages can turn people off. But King was able to connect his radical demands to ideals most Americans could get behind. King wanted racial and social justice as well as economic equality. Many Americans were scared to talk about these demands or outright disagreed with them. King made his goals for racial equality more appealing to moderates by connecting them with the founding principles of the United States of America. He quoted from the Declaration of Independence and the Christian Bible. King's philosophy centered on love, but not emotional, gushy love. Love that motivated people to action. Love that made people care and advocate for others. It was hard to argue against King's tactics. Who could argue against love and justice? Who could disagree with Jesus of Nazareth, the Constitution of the United States, and justice and love? It was hard to oppose King without looking like a villain. Historian August Meyer referred to King as a conservative militant. His ideas were radical, his ideals were radical, even militant, but his tone and demands used safe, traditional language to appeal to the masses. King pushed radical ideals wrapped in a common good, which made his message timeless and powerful. Persuasive strategy number 2, train a broad network of committed activists. Quote from Dr. King: "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others." And that is from Dr. King in his book, Strength to Love. And again, that is a quote that really stands out. A lot of people, well, one student in particular emailed me like, what is the actual difference between the common good and your self-interest? That this quote really sums that up. King was an important, recognizable face for the civil rights movement. He was seen on TV and in newspapers. He gave many famous speeches. He even worked with President Johnson to enact change. But don't get the wrong idea. King was not the entire civil rights movement. He was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind King were hundreds and thousands of local activists and leaders trained to create social change, bring attention to the movement, and protest peacefully. Their dedication gave the movement life. They were able to move people beyond the speeches, and good intentions changed behavior and action. Many stood up as true neighbors and fought for civil rights and equality in the face of intense challenge and controversy. Al Raby quit his job as a public school teacher to tackle discrimination in education, employment, and housing. James Bevel, a minister and leader with King, organized people and events to draw attention to the movement's work. Ruby Bridges became the first student to integrate an elementary school in the South, and she did it at the age of 6. John Lewis participated in the 1961 Freedom Rides. Lewis was beaten for his participation and eventually became a Georgia congressman. It took the powerful leadership of King and other central figures of the civil rights movement, combined with a massive nationwide network of activists and supporters, to bring about lasting change. Persuasive strategy number 3, work within the political system. Quote from King: "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." And that was from a Nobel Prize speech in 1964. The American social and political system was incredibly unfair to African Americans in the 1960s. That sentence right there, as you'll learn in this class, it's not just in the 1960s. It has been around since the beginning of our country and when it was started. And we will look to understand why that is in this class. So not only did African Americans face discrimination in society and the workplace, but it was also legal to deny African Americans access to white businesses and schools. To many, there was no hope to achieve change. To others, the only way to effect change was through armed resistance. King chose a different path. According to Christopher Beam from Pennsylvania State University, the fundamental purpose of resistance was to effect political change, and that meant operating within existing political institutions. Sometimes this meant King had to compromise with those who held power within the unjust system he wanted to dismantle. Take the 1964 Democratic National Convention, for example. At the convention, a crisis developed when a new group, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, demanded to be recognized and seated in the area reserved for the state's delegation. But Mississippi's officially elected delegation, who happened to be all white, said they had the right to hold those seats. Party leaders worked out a compromise that allowed the elected Mississippi delegation to remain in their seats. King accepted the compromise, even though he acknowledged it was accommodating the racism they were trying to end. Many activists were upset with King for this decision. Perhaps you disagree with it today. King argued this gesture would help to ensure the South would not abandon presidential candidate Lyndon Johnson, who King hoped would be an ally if elected. King's actions were focused on the long game, but not just short-sighted victories. 1 year later, newly elected President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. This ensured voting rights for all African Americans and brought federal control over elections in the South. King's decision paid off, giving the civil rights movement an important victory. I just want to stop the article real quick, simply to at least acknowledge something that you should probably pick up on. A lot of the stuff that has happened in the civil rights movement has, like, we remember it as saying, like, of course it was bound to happen. We don't want unfair practices to be held against people that didn't have all the rights that Americans that looked like me had. And one of the things that I had you write about was a literacy test. And this is, if we're watching this video in class, this is where, if we had more time, I'd be like, okay, let's stop here. Let's take one of those literacy tests that were given to African Americans to prove that they could read and write. Because literacy tests aren't just there to prove if you can read and write. And ultimately, you have already commented on whether you think that should be something that all Americans should have in order to vote. They were literally used as tools. These literacy tests were used as tools to keep people from voting. And if you kept people from voting, you took away their power. And if people don't have any power, if they feel like they don't have any power, that is how you kill a democracy, is disempowering people. So back to the article. Persuasive strategy number 4, use powerful symbols and visuals. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, Black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. And that is from Lincoln speaking at the, or Dr. King speaking at the Lincoln Memorial in August 1963. That's from the I Have a Dream speech, if I do believe. Not only was King a brilliant strategist and powerful speaker, he also knew how to get the nation's attention using the media. At a civil rights march in Birmingham, Alabama, he put school children at the front of the march. Police officers had been using fire hoses and dogs to control crowds and activists. King knew they would be less likely to use such brutal force with children. When TV stations and newspapers showed the scenes from this march, it horrified the nation. It also inspired more action. According to Beam, it inspired action in the public and also in Congress. Soon after the showdown between marchers and police, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places. It also banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This act is considered one of the crowning achievements of the civil rights movement. The dramatic photographs that captured the energy of the civil rights movement helped move many to action. While the photographs were not staged, King and other leaders were made use of media to amplify their message, just like many leaders today. Persuasive strategy number 5, connect everything together. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. You can find that on Canvas. By 1967, King's philosophy emphasized economic justice as essential to equality. It's common to hear the remembrances of King as a champion for racial justice and equality. It's less common to hear remembrances of his work for the working class and impoverished of all backgrounds. He did not view race as a separate issue. He believed race was embedded in economic and political systems full of inequality. The Vietnam War was ramping up, and King made direct connections between American violence in Vietnam and American social inequality at home. He saw the early protests of the war and the struggle for civil rights as similar. Paul Harvey, professor of American history at the University of Colorado Boulder, says King believed war was poisoning America and destroying hopes of men all over the world. King helped unite a diverse group of discontent people. Today, we often talk about issues separately. Race and poverty are discussed separately. The Vietnam War and civil rights movement likely have different sections in our textbooks. King did not see it this way. To him, these issues were all connected. King's analysis linked poverty and violence at home and abroad. Looking ahead from the mountaintop. Another quote. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like any man, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And that was from on the mountaintop speech that Dr. King gave in Memphis. And as you'll see in the article, the next day he was assassinated or killed. King was assassinated the day he delivered this famous speech. And again, it's the On the Mountaintop speech. He is gone, but his work continues. Our schools are different because of him, yet students continue to be segregated by race across the nation. They're also separated by economic inequality, but that's just me. There are more legal protections for people of color, but minorities still face discrimination and less access on average to essential aspects of society like voting, quality education, and effective healthcare. The world King saw from the mountaintop has yet to become a reality, but there are still many brave, courageous people carrying on his legacy. We are still trying to reach the heights King dreamed we could. And that's the article. And again, this is still in Unit 6. We're not moving into the history of our founding nation just quite yet, because we want to look at the civil rights movement just this week. And again, like anything else in Unit 6, this is where our study of our government is going. We need an active citizenry to make our country good, to maintain some of the things that were started in the past, to make sure that not just you guys, but your children and your children's children will have the rights that people have fought for a long time, for as long as we exist. So answer the questions in the article, and get ready to learn about some folks and why they were even mad in the first place. Have a good one. Bye.